As you look at the year ahead, are you making some goals for yourself to be less forgetful, more focused, to be someone better than your old self in 2024 versus 2025? Well, for some people with a diagnosis with ADHD or ADD, there's a limiting belief that says there's nothing you can do about it unless you take drugs or whatever. Some people with ADHD, ADD self-medicate. Not everybody, but some do, just to help with the noise in your head. And so today we're going to be bringing some options for you if you are someone who's been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, or someone who knows or loves someone that maybe has some focus issues, maybe not even, or maybe impulse control issues. I've been known to do that when I like jot out something or say something out loud. If you know somebody that fits this description, please know that today we're going to be talking to, because today in the classroom, we are fortunate to have our brain whisperer in the classroom back from 2024 to 2025. And we'll be talking about ADD, ADHD, and how to resolve these diagnoses with brain entrainment, with neurofeedback training. And so today we get to learn something different and new, perhaps, or maybe confirm something that you've already been told. And this is your confirmation for today. So go and get your paper and pen because we're going to learn and grow together.
And when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here waiting for you.
Hi, my name is Lily McDermott, and I am a certified life coach, a certified holistic cancer coach, and the host of The Classroom. If this is your first time tuning into The Classroom, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide natural ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening, as well as my viewing friend, will feel empowered to embrace a new truth and live the life of your dreams. Yes, you heard me correctly. I would say that one of my biggest regrets in my life was not knowing this information when my son was diagnosed with ADHD. And of course, you want to do what's best with the information that you have. And I was coached all the way along to give him more and more and more and more drugs. And, eventually those drugs just stole something from him that I believe he definitely has made up. He's still an amazing young man, but may have stolen that extra creativity, whatever it is with him. And so today I dedicate this class to my son and anyone who has been told that this is as good as it's going to get, but you got to take that pill in order to achieve a more focused demeanor, a more focused mind, a quieter mind. And we're here to say, that is not necessarily true. And since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am grateful that Dr. John Silva is here to do just that. Welcome back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and everybody tuning in.
Yes, absolutely. We live in sunny Florida and it's always so beautiful over here. But for those of you who are up north fighting the cold weather, just come visit us as we are always welcoming people that want to get out of the cold weather. So I'm sure you had a wonderful, focused, and loving holiday season.
Sure did. Yeah, it's always nice to kind of wind down the year and relax and take some time with family. I mean, I do that throughout the year anyway, but
Yeah.
it's just a special time of the year because we get a little bit more focused on doing just that. So
Mhm.
it's been nice, and I'm looking forward to a great 2025 and moving beyond that. Yeah.
Yes, and and I've had great feedback about these classes about neurofeedback training. Most people don't understand what it is, and don't know that this is something they can do in the privacy of their own home. So, Dr. Silva, can you share a little bit about neurofeedback training before we start focusing on ADD, ADHD, and how neurofeedback training can help?
Sure, most definitely. So, a lot to unpack there. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. But neurofeedback is a non-invasive therapy that was developed back in the 1960s to help restore proper brain function, is a simple way to put it. It uses EEG technology. EEG stands for electroencephalogram. For anyone that's ever had a head injury or perhaps had a suspected lesion in their brain causing seizures or stroke and such, you're probably familiar with an EEG either at a hospital or at a neurologist's office. They basically put a cap on your head with multiple sensors. And what we're doing during EEG is we're measuring brain waves. Brain waves is how our brains operate. And these brain waves are measurable. And neurofeedback is based on that same technology. And EEG itself, as a diagnostic, has been around even longer. It was the beginnings of it developed back in the 1930s. So we're talking about, again, old technologies. Of course, they've become much more advanced with computer science and the advancements in computer technology and microchips. But nonetheless, it uses EEG, which is the ability to measure brain waves, and it provides feedback for a person's brain to help the brain to better regulate itself. So let me just dive in and kind of unpack that. So our brains control and regulate every cognitive function in our life. So when we speak of cognitive functions, we're talking things like attention, focus, the ability for memory, and even memory. There's different types of memory. We have what's called working memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. And those of you that perhaps a little bit older and you're suffering with short-term memory, which usually is the one that tends to go first, you know what I'm relating to. So these are all cognitive functions. I mean, just for you, the ability to be tuning into this podcast and listening, maybe taking some notes, those are all cognitive functions. Okay, it's our day-to-day affairs. So it's one of the primary functions of our brain is these cognitive functions, but our brain is also responsible for our emotions. It's what produces our emotions, our emotional well-being. And of course, when we have disruption in our emotional well-being, we can start to have stress and anxiety, or maybe depressive traits, or sometimes a combination of both of those things. And then lastly, our brain also manufactures our behaviors. It's responsible for every behavior we have from day to day, moment to moment. And especially as it relates to ADHD, the H of the ADHD stands for the hyperactivity. That's a behavioral trait that manifests as a result of a brain not functioning properly. So whether it be a child or an adult will display hyperactivity, impulsivity, and such, in addition to, again, the cognitive deficits with lack of attention and focus. So I always like to look at the big picture. Again, brain, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functions. And it's so important, and even though it's just so basic, but it is so important to really getting an understanding of how our brain plays the role in our problem with ADD or ADHD, but also plays the bigger role of the solution. Okay. It all comes from the brain. There's just no way to look at it differently. And so coming back to neurofeedback, neurofeedback is, again, a technology, a therapy developed many decades ago that uses sensors placed on the scalp. Those sensors are then connected to a computer, a specialized computer system that's very simple to operate. And as you had mentioned, neurofeedback can actually be done from the convenience of home these days. Traditionally, it's been done in a clinical setting where you would go to a clinic for typically half-hour to 45-minute sessions, usually 3 times a week. This is a training, so it does take time. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that as well. But what's neat about the way the technology has advanced in the last 5 to 6 years, and I've embraced this new technology, is we now have the ability to use the same neurofeedback technology, the same neurofeedback systems but scaled down for user friendliness and ease of use to be able to put this in a person's home and do their neurofeedback sessions from home. And again, what do they consist of? There's just some sensors on the scalp, and these sensors don't emit any electricity. They're simply sensors that are reading brainwave activity in real time. That information is conveyed into the computer. The software that runs the whole process is computing that information. And basically what we're looking at what I call brainwave dysregulation. So what does that mean? Well, let's first start talking just, again, basics of brainwaves. So people may have heard of the concept of brainwaves. And in fact, we have several different brainwaves that operate in our brain. We have what are called delta brainwaves, theta brainwaves, alpha, beta, and then gamma. And again, these brain waves is how our brains function and what provide, again, our cognitive, emotional, and behavioral well-being. But what happens is throughout our lifetime, because of stressors, whether it be toxic stressors, poor dietary habits, emotional stressors, head injuries, these brain waves can shift outside of their normal operating range. And it can happen to all five of them, whether it be delta, alpha, theta, beta, gamma, or it can be just one or two of them. And what happens is when these brain waves shift outside of the normal operating range, there's where we can start to manifest problems with, again, our cognitive abilities, our emotional well-being, and behavioral well-being. And for most people, it's usually a combination of all those three things. So hence the diagnosis. Whatever that diagnosis might be, whether it's, again, ADD, ADHD, your depression, your anxiety, your behavioral issues. And that's where these problems come from. It comes from the brain, come from these brain waves, not in their normal operating range. So what neurofeedback aims to do is, while the sensors are on a person's scalp, they're watching a video. And this is the cool thing about this, is you get to watch, and Lily, you've done this before. You get to watch a movie on Netflix, you get to watch maybe your favorite YouTube channel. The choice is up to you. And as you're sitting there watching the video image fades in and out. So just imagine you're sitting watching a video, I'll say on your computer, and someone's taking the brightness control and just keeps fluctuating it on you. Now, the first few times you do this, it's a little strange, a little awkward, but within a few sessions, and you can relate to this, Lily, you almost don't even notice it anymore. You're just staying in tune with your video.
No,
But
it
here's
is it
yeah,
is just what you prepare, you coached me in what to see, what to do. You're really good at that. And so when it's when you see it and you know it's going to happen and you don't it doesn't make it's not a big deal. It didn't never bothered me. So but keep going, keep
yeah,
going.
yeah. So here's what the magic of this is. So neurofeedback uses a process called operant conditioning. That's the whole premise of how neurofeedback works. So what we're doing, and I'll just try to make this as simple to understand. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of neuroscience behind this, but I think usually when I give people this analogy, it works well. So let's just say you're someone doing neurofeedback, you've got sensors on your scalp, or perhaps your child's doing this and you're watching the process as they're doing it. And by the way, kids love to do this because it's their video time, it's their screen time. What better way to have your child in front of a screen, but also training their brain and healing their brain from their ADD or ADHD at the same time. But nonetheless, you're watching a video. The video image, as I mentioned, is fading in and out intermittently throughout the session. And I usually have people do half-hour sessions. Again, this is done from the convenience of home. At the moments that the screen is dim, that is a person's brain in this, again, dysregulated state. Their brain waves are just either too high or too low. They're not operating properly. Now, interestingly enough, on a subconscious level, your brain, your brain, whoever's listening, does not like the fact that it's trying to watch a video, but yet the screen is dim. And this is what's amazing to me. Of all the things that our brain has to process day to day, moment by moment, something as trivial as just watching a video, believe it or not, your brain pays attention to that, the fact that it's dim. Think about it. You've grown up, you've went your whole life watching movies on a big screen or movies on a television or videos on your computer or nowadays our portable devices. And it's typically, unless you decide to do this for yourself, but typically you're watching it in its full brightness or whatever brightness is comfortable for you, and you're not fluctuating the video image. So your brain realizes this is not something that's normal. It's not right. And interestingly enough, your brain is going to start seeking a solution as to what's going on here and how do I get that screen to go bright. And the cool thing about this is the person doing this, and again, you can relate, you don't consciously have to think about any of this. In fact, I purposely tell my clients, and that's where I see kids do so well. I mean, adults do well with this as well, but kids just inherently know to sit down in front of a video and just enjoy their video. They're not thinking about any of this stuff. Whereas adults, I have to sometimes coach adults because they have it in their mind that they're supposed to be figuring out something, they're supposed to be putting some attention or intention on the screen to get it to go right. And it's funny because it usually has the reverse outcome. We see slower results in the neurofeedback training. They get frustrated. So I always preface the beginning sessions as just go into this, simply enjoy your movie, enjoy your YouTube channel, whatever you've chosen to watch. Don't think about the process. And it does get easier as you go along. But what's happening, to come back to the brain, because the brain's, again, the solution here. So again, subconsciously, your brain, as you're doing this, is trying to figure out, how do I get that screen to go bright? And what we're doing is I have a specific parameters that are programmed into that person's protocol that's unique to their brain, their brain's needs, their brain's dysregulated brainwave patterns. And at the moment the brain figures out, hey, if I adjust this specific brainwave, let's just take theta brainwave activity. If the brain manages to bring down high or elevated theta brainwave activity and meets a certain threshold, the brain gets a reward. And that reward is the screen going bright. Your brain instantaneously notices, hey, I just did something. I got a reward for whatever it is I just did. Okay. And again, this is so cool. It's happening subconsciously. You're not having to consciously think about this process. Now, your brain may be able to maintain that for just a few seconds, maybe up to a minute. But then at some point, your brain kind of fatigues and it goes back to its hardwired patterns, these brainwave patterns that have, again, manifested for many of us over a lifetime. So now the screen goes dim. But here's where really, really cool. Now your brain has memory of what is done in previous repetitions to get that screen to go bright. So it's constantly always trying to seek that reward to get that screen to go bright for you. So during a typical half-hour session, you're just seeing the video images fade in and out. And think of each one of those fading in and out as a repetition of training your brain. So I like to use the analogy of going to the gym, okay? Because neurofeedback is a workout. It is training for your brain. And think of the brain as a muscle or a muscle group. So you know, when you make an intention to go to the gym, or perhaps you use your home workout equipment, and here are our New Year's resolutions to feel more fit, stronger, maybe develop our muscles so we can physically see the difference. You know, you can't expect to just go once or work out in your equipment at home once. You've got to repeat that process several times a week and stay consistent. And over time, by breaking down old muscle tissue and replacement of that is healthier, stronger, developed muscle tissue. And if, again, you keep doing it, and depending on the workout routine you use, you can physically see the differences and you feel healthier. The brain works and operates much the same way. So we have to repeat this process. And this is where I typically have people doing neurofeedback sessions. As I mentioned, in a clinical setting, it's typically 2 to 3 times a week. But what's really neat about doing this from the convenience of home, we can actually do, again, 3 times at minimum. I have some people doing it 4 times. And, you know, I have a lot of people that they're taking the time to watch videos anyway.
Yeah.
So why not take the time to do it daily? And I have plenty of clients that love and just enjoy doing this because it is so easy to do. And they become even more motivated to do more sessions when they start to see the effect of their brain getting stronger and healthier, and these brain waves that I refer to coming into their more normal operating range.
Yeah.
So that, I know it's quite an explanation, but that's how neurofeedback works, and it's existed the same way for many years.
You know, as I was listening to you talk about this, and as much as I've learned with you through this process, it always reminds me of how powerful media for influence is, because if the brain is being trained by turning off and turning on, and it's getting what it needs to get without us even knowing. Look at all the images that children at the age of like they're just looking, swiping and looking at iPads and doing all this stuff, it's molding their brain. And
Mhm.
certainly when our children were little, and I don't know about yours, but when my children were little, because my kids are much older than yours, you know, I would sit with them to watch Sesame Street and we would have a two dialogue. It wasn't just a one-sided. And so we're seeing a lot of confusion with children these days because a lot of messages are coming from Hollywood that are not in alignment with perhaps my message or your message or somebody else's message. And so we need to be careful about allowing children to watch so much television. It's affecting their brains. So
Oh yeah.
this is an opportunity for us to kind of replace that with the proper technique for the brain to kind of get out of that misfiring and rewiring. And so today, as we talk about restoring this, and resolving ADHD, I'm wondering, is neurofeedback, does it particularly respond well to kids with ADHD? And can it help with children with dyslexia?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the reason I say
Excellent.
that with confidence is I've been doing this for quite some time.
Yes.
Uh, Clinical practice for over 20 years, and more than half of that time in clinical practice has been an emphasis on brain therapies.
Hmm.
Neurofeedback is just one of several different ones, but it's the most direct way to influence and improve our brain health.
Hmm.
And it's primarily what I offer. It's really transformed my personal practice, and it's mainly what I do these days. Again, there's several other therapies. In fact, we can even consider a future podcast where we talk about some of these other neurological or brain-based therapies. But neurofeedback is, as far as I know, that exists out there in the realm of brain advancement or brain training, is the most direct way, because again, we're sensing brain waves in real time through the sensors on the scalp. The computer software computes all that information, giving our brain real-time feedback. It's also known as a form of biofeedback, but specifically for the brain. So any listeners who have ever done any type of biofeedback in the past for, say, stress management, for cardiovascular conditions, you're getting feedback from your cardiovascular, your heart rates, your breathing rates, and you're getting some sense of your ability to consciously control and regulate those. So neurofeedback is a specific form of biofeedback, but for the brain. But what's even needed, I guess even more neat about it, is it doesn't take any conscious effort, where some of these other methods of biofeedback, although easy to do require some level of conscious effort. Whereas this, we actually ask a person not to put any conscious effort into it. Let the brain do what it inherently knows what to do. Yeah.
So, as you were saying, absolutely. So, I asked two things. So, I apologize for that. So, I said ADHD and dyslexia.
Mhm.
Do they help both, or just ADD? I just want to make sure that I the absolutely was for both, or just maybe one.
Yeah, let me expand on that. So again, long time doing this, work with plenty of children, and I just want to preface this the rest of our conversation is we tend to think as ADD, ADHD is childhood disorders,
Hmm.
teenage disorders, but the reality is it spans the whole lifespan.
Yes,
In
it's
fact,
true.
I probably work with more adults with ADD, ADHD, whether self-diagnosed or they suspect it or they've had the official diagnosis either as a child
Yep.
or as an adult. And it's running rampant. I mean, no matter what the age. But yes, I work with plenty of children with varying degrees. And here's the thing too, is there's varying degrees of any of these disorders, whether it be ADD, ADHD, autism, which is another neurodevelopmental problem, dyslexia, dyscalculia, which is problems with numbers and math. I mean, they put all the, I just had recently a dad who brought their daughter, mom and dad brought their daughter, and they had brought their daughter to a neuropsychologist, which is usually a first step in the diagnosis process. And basically, the report came back as Dad put it, all the disses. So dyslexia, dyscalculia, there were several others. The reality is, no matter what that disc condition might be, you got to look to the brain. That's the source. So to elaborate on this, again, clinical experience and working with many kids and adults, I have seen kids and adults vastly improve their condition. And in most cases, when enough neurofeedback training sessions have been done and they stay consistent, we can oftentimes resolve it. And I know that may seem far-fetched or way out there because those of you that either have suffered ADD or ADHD or have children, you know the traditional medical approach, which maybe we can expand on that, medications, maybe some counseling, specialized therapy, they're limiting in what they can do. So to think of a solution that could actually resolve the problem, the reality is I see it all the time in my practice. This is not anything new for me. And I've even seen some of the most significant cases, whether child or an adult, of ADD and ADHD. And I've seen them vastly improve, and again, to the point of resolution, where they're able to, if they are taking medication, to, with their doctor's supervision, wean off the medication, not have to rely on the medication. And the reason for that is simply because, again, we're getting to the root source of the problem. We're correcting those brainwave imbalances, or the brain is doing that itself. We're just using the specialized technology to do it. And given enough time, you can make permanent, long-lasting changes in the brain. That's the wonderful thing about neurofeedback too, is not only is it non-invasive, and again, doing it home-based now is convenient, but we're talking a long-term solution, because what we're doing, again, we're teaching the brain to recognize these dysregulated brainwave patterns. And every time a person sits down several times a week to do these, we're reinforcing. And what we're essentially doing, you mentioned rewiring, we're getting the brain to create new neural, what we call synapses or connections. Okay, so the brain is comprised of billions of neurons and nerve cells, and they make these complex connections or circuits. Think of it as as a supercomputer. And what happens is, again, throughout our lifetime, because of stressors, these neurons fire and wire together, but they fire and wire in a way that's not beneficial for us. They fire and wire in a way that the brain waves aren't operating properly, and we start to have struggles with attention and focus and impulsivity. So what we're doing through neurofeedback is we're teaching the brain to say, hey, you know what? And I'm using my fingers here for those of you that might be watching. Think of these as two nerves coming together. There's a little space between them. And there's electrochemical information that's conveyed from one. It's like a little spark, just like wiring. And what we're doing is we're getting the brain to bypass these old faulty connections responsible, say, for instance, their attention problems. And we're telling the brain, hey, start creating these new neural connections between these neurons over here. Keep reinforcing those so they stay strong. Next thing you know, we've eliminated this old unhealthy neural connection, and we've created this new one over here. Again, there's much more complexity. There's a lot more neurons involved, but in essence, that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Repetition. So what have we done? We have helped the person literally rewire their brain, and this is a long-term solution.
And with someone that has dyslexia, I mean, they basically see through a word or a letter and back. It's like they're looking beyond what we see. We look at it this way, and they look at it this way. And so, will that pattern, can that be changed in a quick period of time, or does that take a little longer? And do you
It
have other
depends.
therapies that you use along with neurofeedback to help?
Yeah. So it depends on, again, the severity of whatever XYZ condition. And sometimes I don't even really like to refer to any of these as any diagnoses. Leave that to the medical community,
Sure.
prescribing medications or interventions.
Yeah.
More importantly, what's going on in the brain, how severe when we measure, say, on a QEEG or through different neurometric brain mapping assessments. And then that gives me a better insight as how much training we may need. And of course, we just monitor the brain's ability to make these changes. And that's the neat thing about neurofeedback, which we don't really get into, and I don't think we've ever discussed on previous podcasts. But as a person's doing their neurofeedback sessions, or their child's doing these neurofeedback sessions from home, all of the data during the session is recorded, and it's recorded, stored in the cloud. And then remotely, whether it be a few hundred miles here in Florida or thousands of miles, I'm working with a new gal from London that actually came from our event a couple of months ago. I'm able to analyze the recording of that whole half-hour to 45-minute session, and I'm looking at a number of metrics and data points that are showing me how their brain did during that session. And then I'm also looking at the accumulated data of all those sessions, because neurofeedback isn't just about a single solitary session making all these changes. Again, it's the repetition. So I can actually monitor how a person's brain is performing, make adjustments along the way if necessary. If we see the brain not quite responding, I'll make adjustments. That gets uploaded to the cloud, it downloads to their computer and their software, and their brain now picks up on these new program changes.
Mhm.
It's so neat what we can do with technology and the internet these days. But that's the neat thing about this is we can actually see evidence, measurable evidence. And I like to share this from time to time. In fact, I'll usually do a screen share with people if we're doing a Zoom call
Yeah.
or if they're here in my clinic. I'll break out their neurofeedback computer or mine and I'll show them the recording of their session and show them how their brain is doing. And there's a lot of complexity to the numbers and the graphs, but I try to break it down and make it as simple as
You're really
possible.
good. You're really good at that too. You're very hopeful and I love that about you. So are there patterns? Like you've looked at thousands of these patterns. Do you recognize patterns when you're doing like maybe the first training session that, oh yeah, this is very similar to so and so that also has ADHD? Are there patterns that the brain shows? And can you identify those patterns as ADD, dyslexia, and the DISs?
Great question, great point. So coming back to brainwaves again, so we have delta brainwaves, theta, alpha, beta, and what we call gamma. Gamma we don't, at least as neurofeedback is concerned, or quantitative EEG, which is a form of brain mapping,
Mhm.
we don't look into too much because it's hard to measure with the technology or equipment we use. But we look at the delta, theta, alpha. And by the way, I'm listing those in the order of slow brainwaves, delta being the slowest in the human brain, to beta being the second fastest. But a typical pattern I will see, especially in kids, but also adults, is we will see an elevation or too much theta brainwave activity, particularly in the front part of our brain called the frontal or prefrontal cortex, and more specifically, especially in children, on the left. This is measurable. This is identifiable either through the brain mapping process, which is kind of like our initial diagnostic tool, or I can also pick up these traits as the person, again, is doing their individual neurofeedback sessions. So we see this elevation of theta brainwave activity. Again, elevation of a brainwave may sound good. I've got a lot of brainwave activity. That means I should be strong, I should be smart, I should have a high IQ. Not necessarily true. Again, it's all about balance. It's about being in that optimal range. So I like to use, again, analogies. So think about blood pressure, okay? Especially those of us as adults that maybe have had incidences or perhaps have blood pressure problems. We know that we should have a blood pressure of 120 over 80 and be within a few points of that 120 over 80 throughout our lifetime. But what happens is that can be altered because of, again, different stressors throughout our lifetime.
Mhm.
And when that either becomes too high or too low, we now have a set of symptoms which make up that diagnosis. And of course, then we have the appropriate interventions, the medical interventions. Our brain waves operate the same way, no different. We should have an optimal range for delta brain waves, theta brain waves, alpha and beta. So a common trait, call it a neurological signature or pattern that we see in QEEG and neurofeedback sessions is elevation of theta brainwave activity. Can be through the whole brain, but again, especially in the frontal cortex and especially in the left frontal cortex with kids. And then another trait that we see, so we have this too much theta, we have too little beta. And that can be, again, widespread throughout the person's whole brain or more isolated into the frontal region. In fact, there's a specific what we call neurometric or metric that we measure, again, either during the neurofeedback sessions or with the brain mapping process. It's called the theta to beta ratio, meaning our brain is, there should be this proper number, like blood pressure. It should be this optimal range. But what happens is when your brain starts creating too much theta brainwave activity and not enough beta, so theta too high, beta too low, guess what? That number starts to come outside of its normal range. And it's one of several different numbers that we look at with EEG or QEEG.
And you're able to see kind of the improvement as each training session occurs. So are
Yes.
you able to go back to the parent or go back to the adult and say, this is where we were, and this is where we are now. I remember the first training session I had, it was like crazy. And then after the first session, there was like this calming or a pattern that seemed to be more pleasing to my brain. I don't know. What would you describe it as? Is that something that my brain is looking for so that it will relax and not feel like it has to be in sympathetic mode, or maybe overcorrection of parasympathetic mode?
Yeah. Yeah, so in essence, what I'm able to see through these different values and numbers, colorimetrics, and even you were describing the graph that I showed you where
Yeah.
you see your brain
Or you
waves
see me
jumping up and
crossing
down at
over.
the session.
Wow.
Yeah, and when people typically first start, there's just this abnormal pattern on the graph, and as they continue to do more sessions, we start to see this more normalization of this graph where they're not everywhere. They're in fact, there's a term called consolidation. We're starting to see their brains come into a more normal operating range. They're looking more fluid, if you want to call it that. So these are all the traits that we're looking at. And again, what's happening at the level of the brain, that is the brain based on the specific neurofeedback training protocol that I have programmed into their software,
Hmm.
to get the brain to recognize, let's take that theta to beta. So in a situation like that, again, the parent brings in their child. I'm going to set up a specific neurofeedback training protocol for that child based on their brain's needs. And again, in most cases, for a lot of kids, it's that elevated theta brainwave activity and that low beta. So we're teaching the brain, I've programmed the parameters. Hey, brain, when you bring down that elevated theta and you meet a certain threshold of doing that, while at the same time, so the brain has to work on two different things.
Yeah.
While at the same time you're bringing up your decreased beta and you meet that threshold, screen goes bright for you. And again, child's just sitting there watching their videos. They're watching SpongeBob and they're enjoying it. They're not thinking about any of this stuff, but their brain is actively engaged, and it actually likes it. It's our brain is a significant, I mean, our brain is a sensory input organ. Our primary focus of our brain is to detect our surrounding, every waking, every sleeping moment, second of our lifetime. Primarily what our brain focus. And our primary brain focus is to keep us out of danger. Detect
Yes.
danger, keep us out of danger. Now, again, there's a lot more to the brain, but that is it.
Hmm.
And when the brain sees something, again, this is what's amazing, as trivial as watching a video that keeps fading in and out, it sees that as a stressor and it's going to figure out what's going on here.
Wow.
And again, it figures this all out and says, all right, let's correct those theta and beta brain waves. We keep reinforcing that session to session. And the next thing you know, this child, weeks down the road, has now got these new theta brainwave theta brainwaves in the normal operating range, beta brainwaves in the normal operating range. And during this journey, they're feeling better. Their parents are seeing the results, or if it's an adult, they're seeing the results. So again, it's great to get into all the science and all the metrics. At the end of the day, can you recognize the difference within yourself if you're the person doing this for yourself or perhaps your child? And again, in most cases, as long as the person stays consistent, I do what's asked of them. Again, it's very simple. You're sitting watching videos, you will see, or your child, you will experience those results. And for
Yep.
many people, it's a gradual process.
Hmm.
What I typically tell people is usually within 2 to 4 weeks, people are starting to notice some change. They may be subtle changes, but they're noticing some change. I do occasionally, in fact, that gal we're talking about from London, she just started she's in her second week of neurofeedback. So last week was her first week. Within the first 5 sessions of the first week, she's actually doing 5 a week. She's a go-getter.
Just
Um,
sounds like me.
yeah,
I was like
she's
yeah,
already
I was
noticing
going for the
it.
Olympics. I was going for the gold.
Yep. Yeah, and I really enjoy working with anybody, but especially those that really, and again, you don't have to understand all this complexity. You just need to
No.
understand that this is easy to do. It's a way to train the brain for long-term benefit, to get out of your inability to stay attentive, or your child to gain more attention, more clarity, more focus. If they're having behavioral issues, it's a way to get to the root source of their bad behaviors. Bad, call them bad. It's not your child trying to disrupt you or your family or themselves or their teachers or their fellow students. It's just their brains aren't functioning properly. It's no fault of them, and
Yeah.
it's sad because I've seen a lot of families. The family dynamics really start to deteriorate when they have a problematic child, or it gets even worse
You
still when
just
you have
you just
several
don't know what
children.
to do. You don't know what to
Yeah.
do, and the savior is the pill, and it's not. It creates more problems. And like I said at the beginning, it is probably my greatest regret in life was listening to outside of my intuition, which was to try to work with behavior modification. I didn't have the tools that I have today. I did the best that I could back then, so I don't beat myself up with it. But
Mhm.
if people ask me, what is your biggest regret? I would say giving my son ADHD medication. But at the time, it wasn't. At the time, I was doing it for the right reasons. But then I had a friend who actually made a decision to do the detoxification, all that stuff. But before we go on to that, I just wanted to encourage you all to go to whenyounneedafriend.com. This is where we take 100% responsibility. This is where you get the information that is not out there in the mainstream media. And so I want to encourage you that if you know somebody that has some cognitive issue, even for me, it wasn't that I had a cognitive issue, it's just that I wanted to see, how it would improve my sleep, how it would improve my performance, how all those things. And let me tell you, checking off these boxes of the things that I've wanted, neurofeedback was a great answer for me. And I want to encourage you to look into it yourself, be curious about it instead of critical. And also, Dr. Silva and we put together a class that you could purchase at whenyounneedafriend.com. So while you're at whenyounneedafriend.com, please subscribe, like, and follow me on all social media. Make sure that you put a comment, an emoji, share it, because that is a way that the algorithms get confused and the information gets out there. So I want to encourage you to get it out there. While you're at whenyounneedafriend.com, if you want to listen to this class over and over again, then make sure that you check out my sponsors, support my sponsors the way that they're supporting the classroom. Also, I have the Shop Now bag that helps out with a small fee to help with all the costs to do the class, which, by the way, are greater than what I get in. So I just want you to know that everything that you can do, if you want to become an enrolled student in the classroom, whether it's your time, your treasure, and or your talent, please consider doing everything you can to help this information continuing to be out there, because this is information I wish I would have had. And neurofeedback has been around for a long time. So that goes to show you someone who is considering right now giving their child medication. I'm not judging it. All I'm saying is there are other options before you take that route. Go as natural as you possibly can. And that's what I love about having Dr. John Silva here. All his information is behind me and behind me here. You can email Dr. Silva, let him know that you heard him in the classroom. You can email me or text me at 407-373-5959. You can reach out to his phone number, 772-494-2576. Because if I would have heard this back when my child was smaller, I wonder if I would have listened. I wonder if I would have done something different. I didn't have any other choice at the time. So I'm just planting these seeds in you to be curious about this. You can also drive to Dr. Silva, or you can just call him and do this from anywhere around the world. So what I love about this is you can do this through telemedicine. And I'm a witness that, someone that is a follower of the class, of the classroom, was attended the rewiring the brain workshop, and she was so excited to get started, and I'm so grateful that she is. But you could also drive to Port St. Lucie, who's a beautiful place to go to in Florida, just south of where I live, and do the testing and the training and just to get you started, or you can just do it by answering some questions too. And I know that you have, for the people that purchased the Rewiring the Brain webinar,
Mhm.
you had some discounts for them too.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
still are you still
So,
doing that?
yeah. In fact, expanding on what you just mentioned, you have my website there, www.drjohnsilva.com. What I'd
Hmm.
like to do for this podcast, anyone tuning in, if you go to my website, I have a chat feature, and we're going to get into this in a moment if we have some time. Not to beat up the drugs, but especially for kids, and I'd like to touch on one classification of drugs that just blows my mind still to this day that we would do this to our children. But anyway, there's a number of things going on there, but if you go to my chat feature, what I would be willing to do is I dug deep in my digital library and I have a plethora of information I've acquired over 20 years, but I have a drug nutrient depletion chart or PDF. And this covers all spectrum of different drugs for all different kinds of conditions. But one of the reasons why we have side effects of drugs is because, again, there's many physiological explanations, but one of them is because they deplete basic nutrients that our body needs to thrive and survive and perform at its best. And unfortunately, most medications will have some depletion. So I will send you this. It's an interesting read. Again, you can just skip right to the medication that you might be taking, or perhaps your child is taking, and just take a look. And if anything, if you're seeing a bunch of depleted nutrients like vitamin D, vitamin B, C, you may want to start considering, if you're not already doing that, supplementing and maybe supplementing a little bit beyond your multivitamin. So I'd be willing to share that with you. Just go ahead and in the chat, just put ADHD podcast, and I will send you, just, of course, leave me your email and I will send that to you. But I would also like to share with you, which is a great visual, and sometimes it's hard to relate this through a podcast, audio podcast. But I have another, it's almost like in fact, it's what we call a brain map. What it is a top-down view look of the head and brain, and it maps out the different regions of the brain. As we were talking about theta to beta, we're talking about the frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex. So this PDF, it's a one-page PDF, outlines each region of our brain. And what's neat about it is if you follow the chart, it gives you like this little breakout balloon or bullet point, and it shows you some of the primary cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functions that we have been able to identify, again, decades of neuroscientific research that are processed in this part of the brain. Okay. Now it's an oversimplification of how our brains work. There's a lot more dynamics and complexity to it, but it's a great little starting point because, again, I see this so many times. People, again, whether an adult coming in to see me for their ADHD or a parent bringing their child in, one, we just never took the time to think about our brain as the source. And then secondly, when people start to even think about the brain, there's just so much complexity to the neuroscience of the brain, and we're not expecting people to understand it. But start here. And this chart, when I show people this chart, they're like, ah, it's like that aha moment. Wow, I didn't. And it gets actually, it's fascinating because you can start to look to see, oh, where do my emotions come from? Where does specific like dyslexia, where does that come from? So I'm on a point, and again, I'm looking at this chart on my computer now, but if you look at a location called, this is the designation we use when we use the sensors for neurofeedback. It's called FP1, which stands for the prefrontal cortex on the left side. But if you follow this chart, you'll see the number one function is attention. That's
Wow.
again, and this is something that we've been able to map out in
Is it
neuroscience
is
for
this a
decades.
is this a PDF where you press a button and it highlights where it affects? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a simple PDF you can just at quick glance look at.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. That sounds amazing. That sounds
Yeah,
amazing.
so I'll share that with you along with the nutrient depletion chart or PDF
That's
that
amazing.
shows you the nutrients that are depleted with common medications taken for a variety of different conditions.
And I know that there's a couple of videos that has to do with that you also recommend, so you could probably let them know about those videos as well. What are the names of the movie?
Yeah, so a great documentary that came out, and I believe it was 2010. It is, last time I checked, available on YouTube. It is called Making a Killing. And then the subtitle is The Untold Story of Psychotropic Drugging. It is a eye-opener, to say the least, especially as it relates to the use of medications for our children for a plethora of neurodevelopmental problems. Again, whether it be teens or kids suffering anxiety, social inabilities, ADD, ADHD, you name it. It is quite an eye-opener. Um, I remember when I first saw that documentary, in fact, I bought the DVD. There was a portion where they actually talk about the effects, the side effects of certain medications. And some of these medications, especially when you get into the more potent ones, tend to produce as a side effect suicidal ideations or suicidal tendencies.
I know.
And to hear the stories of parents,
Yeah.
families who've lost their children
Heartbreaking.
to suicide because of
Heartbreaking.
the, I hate to use the word damn medications, when there are so many other better ways. And I'm not knocking medication. I guess always my general broad blanket, broad statement. But especially when it comes to our kids, and especially for these conditions, brain-based conditions, as I call them, there's such a better way to do this. So,
Yeah.
speaking of drugs, and I want to touch on this because I've seen so many parents bring their kids in who are on this specific classification of drugs, and this is something you can research on your own. You can go to the National Institute of Health Data Library, but I have a big document, and I'm looking at it now. They're called analeptics, just general category. And within that, we have the subcategories of amphetamine, dextroamphetamine, and methamphetamine, by the way, which is basically in the same classification as is the street drug, meth. So to consider that when you're taking this or giving this to your child. But under that subclassification, we have the brand names, things like Adderall, Dexedrine, Dextrostat, Dexicin, Procentra, Vyvanse, and really start to do. And again, with Google and even with AI nowadays, it's so easy to scour the internet within a few minutes. Start to read as to what these medications, the mechanism of action, as they call it, all the list of side effects. They usually categorize the side effects as the most prevalent ones to the least prevalent ones. Um, but the point I'm trying to make, this classification of drugs, because they're stimulants, they do not repair anything, because even if your child or you are taking these medications, and again, this is just one classification used for ADD or
Mhm.
ADHD,
Mhm.
but is the most potent ones in my opinion.
Yeah.
Even if they do provide some symptom relief, they're only going to provide enough relief until your next dose. Consider this. They're doing nothing to fix your brain.
No.
You've got to look at the solution. Drugs
Yes.
are not the long-term solution. And what happens is the brain starts to develop more of a dependency. So when next thing you know, we're taking our child back in because whatever short-lived result they did have, we now have to adjust the dosage, or we need to try a different medication, or we need to put them on a
Or it
second or
creates
third.
something,
Yes.
another issue, which they're not hungry enough, or now they're eating too much, and
Mhm.
now they have to give them another drug to suppress their appetite or increase their appetite, and it just becomes a crazy thing. So everybody's going to have to make that decision, but at least you have resources that you can look at. Now, when I first heard of neurofeedback, or brain entrainment with brain tap and all that, I thought, I don't want anybody to control my mind, especially if you can make some adjustments, some tweaking. And can you speak to a parent or an adult that is fearful of someone coming in and altering their brain?
Yeah, great. And I get that from time to time, especially with parents bringing their children in. This does not alter your brain. It's not manipulating. Again, the brain has full control of what it's doing during the whole process. So it doesn't change who your child has become, doesn't change their personality, only makes a better version of them, makes a better version of you. That's the way I can simply put it. So it's not manipulative. It's not reprogram or rewiring you, and it's not coercing your brainwave activity in such a way that's manipulative. But
So
yeah,
you can't make someone cluck like a chicken.
no, no. That would be a limit. That would be that's I think of
Hypnosis. It's like
hypnosis. Yeah, yeah. This is not
I don't even
hypnosis.
know
This
if
is.
I've had I've had hypnotists try to hypnotize me, and I'm like, I'm not a very easy target. I'm not an
Yeah.
easy one to hypnotize. But those are some of the things. And what about
Sure.
affordability? Because you think of these drugs that people are taking, and it's a
Mhm.
lot of money for drugs. How does this compare with therapy or drugs when it comes to neurofeedback and resolving ADHD? Resolving is what you're making this is what you said. I said, "Are you sure you want to say resolving?" And you said, "Absolutely." So
Yeah.
how certain are you?
Um, Very affordable, very affordable. I offer a variety of different monthly pay plan options for families and kids. And put it this way, I have whole families that work with me. So
Mhm.
if a whole family, mom, dad, and 2 to 3 children can do this, really anybody can afford to do this. And it is a fraction of the cost of typical medical interventions. I'm serious, it's a fraction of the cost. And again, it's not something, and this is the great thing about it. Again, now we can talk, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts. There's a whole time and place for using neurofeedback for ongoing peak performance.
Mhm.
But when it comes to these conditions, ADD, ADHD, we take a person through, whether it be 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. That's to be determined once we do an evaluation. But that's all they need to do. This is not something they have to continue to do like they would if they're taking medications,
Yeah.
because again, we're getting to the root source. We're rewiring the brain in a non-manipulative way. Child loves it. They're watching videos. It's easy enough to do. You do it from home. I can't think of a better, and again, this is why it completely has transformed my practice. One, because it helped my son many years ago when he was
Mhm.
9, struggling
Yeah.
with not attention, but other neurodevelopmental problems. And I saw the ability for his brain to change. And again, he was in my practices before I was doing home-based neurofeedback, but he was watching SpongeBob at that time. That was just his show of choice. And I'm thinking, how is this working? And so anyway, yeah, it's quite amazing. So again, send me a chat through my website. I'll be happy to send you those 2 documents. And if we want to strike a conversation on how perhaps we can help your child or yourself, we'll take that next step.
Yes, and let them know that you heard it from us here in the classroom. I am so grateful to you. I'm glad that we're partnering up with this. I know that this year we have some plans that we're going to make together, and I really do feel that this is a solution to what we've been told there is no solution. And people go their entire life feeling like their brain is not working properly. So it's time now to just stop telling people to try better and just to do something that's going to be different to rewire the brain. So thank you so much, Dr. Silva, for everything that you do to bring this sanity back into this insane world where we put all our value on a pill that is only as good as the next dose and the next dose. But it's so nice that we can get to that conclusion and feel like there's resolution. So thank you so much for your information today.
You're welcome, Lillian, and thank you for having this podcast and having me on multiple times. And thanks for listening, audience, for tuning in.
Ah, I love it. I love it. And so now it's up to you. You can't unlearn truth. You can't unsee what you want to see. You can see it once you see it. So please make a wise decision that will best support you and your children. And please remember, we'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lily McDermott and Dr. John Silva wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best day ever.
Ever.
Good job. That's the best one of this year.
The opinions and advice expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.